The absolute irony to be doing a Moulin Rouge video with actual consumption. We are nothing if not historically accurate here.
She has consumption.
Anyway, this project began with a dare. I was dared by my assistant Marley that somebody show up to this Moulin Rouge themed ball in the silver beaded outfit. I wasn't terribly familiar with the film, but I wanted nothing more than a good beading project. So, of course, I took one look at the copious amounts of beading to be had on this project, and I said, bet. This doesn't actually look that hard. Okay, so if we find the beaded fabric, the rest of it should be pretty manageable, right? But here's the catch. It's an 1890s themed event. 1890s Moulin Rouge. So what if we made this costume as if it was 1890s evening wear? We use 1890s sewing methods, we take 1890s patterns, we look at 1890s beading references, and we just see what happens. Step one before we do absolutely anything is we need to make a plan. Especially when it involves historical stuff. We're gonna need research, we're gonna need references, we gotta break out the Milanote boards. So Milanote are actually sponsoring this video, which I'm super thrilled about because I have been using this app for literal years to plan all of my projects. So this is like so perfect. But basically Milanote is first of all completely free to sign up for. I absolutely adore it. You have a completely blank slate of a mood board for whatever you want to collect and organize in a way that is most visually useful to you and also allows you to collaborate and communicate things to other people who you might be working with. So I'm gonna make a little flow chart and we're gonna start with our references. Obviously it's very burlesque, but we want to make it 1890s. So I'm also going to pull a bunch of images of 1890s evening wear, which I can literally just right-click, save to Milanote. This one might be kind of interesting. That way when I go back to my Milanote board, it's all just right here waiting for me. So we have the original film costume, we'll have some 1890s evening wear, which will be the sort of shapes and silhouettes that we're going for. Oh my god, the other thing that I absolutely love is that it saves the original link to the image, which is so useful. The amount of times that I've saved a really useful image only to find out that I need to cite it later or I need to go back to the original source to find out, where is it from? So we are saved. I do actually have a black velvet skirt that I've made for a previous 1890s evening project that I could use for this, and it would save me a lot of time. So I really just have to focus on the bodice bit and the beading, which is going to take a while. I really want to look at references of 1890s beading. What sorts of beads are they using? What patterns? What motifs? There's this really interesting example that I found here that has these little stars. It's very similar to these little stars that are on her bodice, but obviously more 1890s flavored, which I enjoy. We're seeing a lot of these kind of pearlescent white beads. Some silver spangles. Oh, and these Montees, these bright crystal Montees, those we can definitely use. We see lots of these crystal Montees on the original film gown, and of course we've got crystal Montees on the 1890s example, so that can definitely stay. So the next thing that I'll need to work out is where I'm getting the pattern from. Obviously I'm gonna drape this myself, but I need to know what references I'm going to be working off of. I want to try and get as close as possible to the film gown while also remaining true to the period. The tricky thing with 1890s evening wear is that a lot of it is draped. We have a lot of like crossbody asymmetrical draping, which we don't really want for this project because we are looking at really a flat bodice surface. So I found this one gown at the Phoenix Art Museum that I think shape-wise will work out quite well for what I want to do with this gown. I've also found an image of the back of the gown which shows that it's spiral laced down the back, which was definitely good to know because I will just spiral lace this gown down center back and it will all be great. So I can do a little sketch here. So we'll have our little front piece. Then there's quite a larger side piece. And then whatever these pieces are gonna look like, but it looks like there's 4, and that will roughly be what I'm trying to do. Yeah, so we'll have a 9-panel bodice. Yeah, that sounds doable. But the last thing that I have to really focus on are the materials of this gown. So what are we making this out of? I've done a little bit of searching around online. I've come across a couple of different samples that I think might work. Anything kind of latticey, kind of geometric, I think will work as well. So I can just tick off swatch ordered once we've ordered those swatches. We've ordered all the swatches. This one, I think here at the top right is going to be the top choice because it's just gorgeous. I mean, obviously we won't know until the swatches all come in, but I think this is gonna be the top choice here. The beads is gonna be a whole different ball game. So I've made a separate board here where all the beads are gonna go because I've ordered a ton of beads online. I pulled a lot of sort of pearly white beads, a lot of plain sort of crystal beads, definitely a ton of crystal Montees. Just recording the source information, where I've got all these beads from, just so that if and when I need to order more of them, I know exactly where to go to get them. So I like to have my boards sort of chronologically outlined in kind of a timeline, starting with the research, going into different references, and I'll keep updating my beads board over here. There's over 100 different built-in templates for Milanote in case you do not wish to start with a completely blank canvas. I love doing that, but like if that's not your jam, there are so many different templates that you can choose from. It's really just here to help make your creative planning, organizational life as easy as possible, and in my opinion, it absolutely does that. I can share with my assistant Marley, who will actually probably be doing a lot of the updating in terms of what beads we're using and just keeping things organized and updated. Once again, Milanote is completely free to sign up for with no time limit. There's no free trial or anything. It's just free to sign up for. So you can sign up for your Milanote account by using the link in the description box below to tell them I sent you. And now let's move on to making this thing actually happen. First things first, I'm going to get the beadwork started because this is going to take the longest. I have quite a number of train journeys coming up, so between weekends and late nights, I should be able to get this done out of work hours before I have to start putting together the bodice. So I cut out my lapels out of some scrap velvet and backed these with a bit of tarlatan, the stiffened cotton that the Victorians absolutely loved to shove into anything that needed a little bit of structure. In order to get the tail edge strips though, I did need to draft the whole tails first. The whole costume, I gather, is riffing off of Victorian men's evening wear with the top hat and tails, so using some late 19th century tailoring guides for reference, I got these shapes determined and a little mock-up cut out which I could work from. After determining my beading pattern, I could proceed to spend the next few weeks beading.
Pattern and beading tests are underway. I think I'm pretty satisfied with how this is coming out. This is going to be the full beading pattern, although I have to take this edging off and redo this because it is not as straight as I would like it to be. I have come out with a new theory. I think they're meant to be strung first and then stitched on. So I'm going to take these off, I'm going to redo these. I still have to do the in-between swirly bits on this, and then this will be done. I have to, again, do another side for this as well, but I think I'm gonna hold off on the Montees for these until I've actually attached this strip to the rest of the fabric, just because we've got some curvature going on here, and as I have learned in this process, these are very finicky when it comes to dimension of that edge. No, 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 no. I'm not sure this is actually making my life easier. In fact, I think it might just be making my life harder. No!
The lapel pieces are backed with some black taffeta, both to hide all of the grunginess, but also to give them a little bit of extra stiffness. These beads are quite heavy, so the more support that they have, the better.
I'm determined to get this bodice draped by the end of today.
I believe in you.
Can I get it draped in mock-ups? And finish the lapel beading?
It's 11:25.
Listen.
But maybe.
After drafting my pattern and making a mock-up to test out the fit and to make some necessary changes, I'm transferring things over to the final paper pattern pieces so I can cut them out of the fabric. We're going to be working with 3 layers here. The fancy beaded layer, of course. I ended up choosing this lattice pattern in silver beads. And because this is sheer, I'm going to back it with a gray Duchess satin to add both some structure, once again to hold up the weight of the beads, as well as to give it a slightly deeper silver color to match the film costume. I've also got a gray silk taffeta lining, which will also add some structure, and while linings aren't always necessary in Victorian bodices, I won't be able to bind off the edges here, so I will need a way to finish off the edges later.
I'm so afraid to cut this. Like, how do you even? I'm gonna cut it with a lot of seam allowance, I guess.
Nice.
Which feels like a horrific waste, but what can you do?
Just supervising. I started off preemptively cutting the beaded layer with plenty of seam allowance, since a lot of the time these beaded fabrics are very loosely embellished and the severing of one thread can release a whole section of beads. But much to my surprise, this fabric actually turned out to be really well made, and the beads actually stayed pretty well in place. So for later pieces, I ended up cutting very narrow seam allowances, since this would make the bead removal process later a lot easier. The beaded and satin backing layers are basted together to be treated as one piece during stitching. And I'm just going to consolidate my lining pieces by pinning and stitching them together. I won't really need this for a little while, but at least the pieces will all be in one place for when I am ready for them. Before I get to basting the tail overlays though, I'm first pressing the seam allowances in to clean up those edges, since these pieces will be lined separately. Then I'm just thread marking the edge where the bead strips will overlap so that I know where to stop hammering away the bead bulk. Since beads are really bulky, I'll need to get rid of them where they don't show, so in the seam allowances and where they'll underlap layers like the beaded strips. But I don't want to just cut the edges away since that'll risk loosening the beads where I want them to be. The logical solution to a problem is rarely smashing things, but in this case, smashing things is the answer.
It's hammer time. Hammer time. Mad scientist. Ba-da-da.
This way, the unwanted beads are crushed away while leaving their connecting threads intact, and everything stays nice and secure.
Just to hear it sprinkling all over the room. No! What just went up my nose?
You duck and cover.
Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no.
Then it was all smooth sailing from there, I thought, as I pinned the bodice together, except then I realized I don't actually have a Victorian cording foot for my Victorian machine, which is basically ye old equivalent of a zipper foot, which would allow me to get right up next to the bulky bead section immediately over the seam.
Yeah, I don't think this is gonna work. Oh my god. Am I about to sew this whole bodice by hand? I think I am!
Good thing I am a very confident hand sewer. 3 hours and the fastest half back stitching I have ever done later.
Okay. This floor is just sparkly! Wow, 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 we have sparkle carpet now.
The Victorians are quite specific about the way in which they finish seam allowances on bodices. I'm pinking the edges here since even though the satin isn't exactly the tightest weave, this will get lined and it won't be seen later. But whether the edges are pinked or bound or just left raw as they are in a lot of evening bodices of this period, it is generally proper form within this period to trim them into this scalloped pattern, especially around the waist. This functions the same as notching seam allowances around the curved seams. It'll just help things sit a lot more smoothly around the waist and help to eliminate some puckers. Herein is where we get into some corsetry. Because one thing about Victorian bodices is that sometimes the line between lightweight corset and evening bodice is difficult to spot. Which is actually perfectly timed because I've just been brushing up on my corsetry construction skills. My good pal Loana at Vanyanis Corsets has been running a corsetry workshop for the last few weeks, so I am ready to take on the challenges of waist tapes and boning. Oops, I'm gonna drop the link below for those of you who want to go check it out. This isn't sponsored, but Loana is the sweetest and most wonderful teacher and so unbelievably knowledgeable. I'm just so glad she's sharing her wisdom with us. This is like a blessing upon the people. The boning in these bodices is usually made from whalebone, but for obvious legality reasons, I'm using a synthetic reproduction for this project. The bones tend to only reach about halfway up to just about mid-bust level, just enough to give the bodice some structure and to prevent any collapsing around the waist, but not enough to restrict the breathing.
Here we go.
Whilst I fixed all the Montees onto the edge of the tails into the wee hours, Marley made me watch the film version of Moulin Rouge, and I was very confused. Yep. Why does it move so fast? I just want to see the dress. The finished tail pieces are lined with the same black silk taffeta in the same manner as the lapels, just whip stitched all around with fine, invisible stitches. I got the straps done, as well as the band for the top hat. These are once again made from some sturdy silk taffeta, interfaced with tarlatan since these Montees got very heavy.
Over the weekend, I successfully finished making up both straps for this dress. Just some straps with a little bit of taffeta sewn onto the back to finish off the back edge. I also finished the hat band, which just closes with a little hook and bar closure like that, so that, look, it's removable. And, you know, I can just add this straight to my pre-existing vintage top hat.
With all the decorative appendages good to go, I'm stitching the lapels into place and proceeding to turn in the top and bottom seam allowances. These are whip stitched into place with long, functional stitches in a method actually carried over from 18th century stay making. This will just help those edges to sit nice and flat and be super sharp and crisp. I also decided to add in a little Modesty panel along the back. Theoretically, this bodice will lace edge to edge, but who knows what will happen. It'll just be nice to have a little surface underneath there should anything slide out of place. And once again, some handy tarlatan. The lining is inserted by hand, turning in the raw edges and felling it all down all around. This is the historical method of lining a garment generally, rather than the more modern method of stitching it inside out and then turning the whole garment. After all the careful sculptural work put into these garments historically, the turning process really does risk disturbing all of that work and shifting things out of place. Plus, you get to do some felling. Who doesn't love a good bit of felling? I do. Finally, we have the approximately 1 million eyelet holes down the back. A lot of late Victorian eyelet holes, particularly those seen on evening wear, were done by hand for delicacy. So of course, this is what I'm doing on my reproduction. This has been such a fun project to work on, and exactly the type of sparkling beadwork that I was really craving. I actually fell so much in love with the beading during this process, you can probably expect to see more beading adventures in the future. So subscribe if you wish to come along on some more historical sewing adventures, and if you haven't caught my recent Harvest Moon gown, which is at fault for introducing me to the gold work that started my beading obsession, you might wish to go and give that a watch in the meantime. Most cursed audio coming out of this.
Poor Danny.
Our neighbor's truly just like seething at us today.